I'll try to control my voice. I tend to speak loud when I'm giving a talk, but I'll try it. So very fortunate of me that I was on schedule to give the first talk after we had our meeting last week. Because during that meeting we had a lot of discussions on how to change how the talks should be done. And try to make it more into sort of a basic level in the sense that we know that the people that attend these talks are not the same people that come on every study meeting. As such, the knowledge of Spiritism varies, and sometimes things that we would say in talks would be sometimes above what most people would know, and that misses a link. And if you don't understand that link, you don't understand what that comment was, then it doesn't make sense. So we try to sort of bring it a little more trying to go deeper into the concepts that we bring so that everybody sort of has the same level of understanding from the beginning until the end. So, and that is also a lead into the point that if there's something during the talk that you don't understand, I think it's probably better if you just stop me and ask, because otherwise you lose the train of thought, because this has a very progressive sort of thinking to understand the whole message. And a little different than most spiritual talks that we have here. Because of my background, I'm sort of a little mechanical in terms of mechanistic and how things work, and that's what I value and the reasons why I bring this. So I try to do a mix of really the mechanistic way of how things happen so that we understand actually the quote-unquote physiology of the spirit and the body and the perispirit and all those things. And also trying to bring a message of love and growth and etc. So, bear with me. So, the way, for me specifically, how I came up with the topic became too broad. And I wanted to talk about so many things, and as delved into it, it would have been easily a 2-hour sort of presentation. So, that's why part 1 and part 2. I thought it was sort of the best way to do it. And it comes a lot to do with, sort of frustrations that we have. Myself, for those who don't know, I'm a physician, I'm a surgeon. And the frustrations that we have in terms of medical treatment these days, and the uncertainties that we have in medicine, even in the 21st century. And what I mean by that is essentially that, for whatever reason that medicine or science cannot explain, you can have 2 patients and you provide the same care for both patients. One have excellent results and the other one doesn't. And of course, the more we know about science, the more we can understand certain differences, but there's always something that we don't understand. And we tell them that's chance, So we have to quote patients, you have a 90% chance of getting better. Why? Why 10% don't get better? And I think that's what sort of made me delve into it. There's got to be something more than, at least that we don't understand in terms of science yet, but maybe in the Spiritist world can help us. And to me it was also, as being part of Spiritism for a while, I wanted to dig more. I mean, what exactly is a pass? Sorry.
What is allopathic?
Allopathic is the opposite of homeopathic.
Okay.
So it's actually medicine as we know, scientific Western medicine.
Okay.
So I'll give you a medicine, you get better. I take something out of you, in theory you get better, that kind of stuff. So also,
the mainstream medications that we take every day.
Everything is allopathic. Correct. Everything that is exactly homeopathic. That's why the difference is homeopathic means more sort of botanical, smaller doses, a completely different concept of how to treat diseases. Allopathic medicine gives you high doses for shorter periods of time with the intent of really rebalancing the organism sort of quickly, because we're immediatists, so we want it done fast. So.
But isn't that harmful to our body?
Yes and no.
Sometimes.
It depends. I mean, as we know, almost every drug has side effects, and side effects are the harmful part potentially of any treatment that is given. They don't vary according to which disease, with treatment, with medicine, what do you do, or surgeries.
Just comparing with homeopathic medicine.
Yeah, homeopathic medicine, most of the time they are giving similar active substances at, a completely different level of concentration. I mean, such low doses for a very prolonged period of time. So it's almost like spiritual treatment in the sense that it takes time. You know, there's more to it than just the medicine. There's a whole process in a way. Allopathic medicine, no, don't worry, you know, we'll give you something that's going to cure you, and you'll be fine. And unfortunately, we know that's not always the case. But we shouldn't take away. I mean, medicine is important, and all the mentors and all the teachings that we have say that, you know, we still have medical treatment. Just don't go just pure spiritual or homeopathic. I mean, it's part of science, and science is based on God's law and exists for a reason, so it should still be used. So what is exactly the passes? You know, how do they help? What is fluidotherapy? Passes, fluid, and all that stuff. So all those terms, you know, what do they mean really? And then ultimately getting to, you know, do miracles really exist? You know, all the history, all the stories we hear from the Bible, how Jesus cured this, how the apostles cured this. What is this? Is it all mystical? Is it magical? What is this? And we're going to see, hopefully, in the end of the second part, which will have the whole talk together, is that we're gonna see that there's nothing mystical, there's nothing magical. It's all based on concepts that we might not be able to explain entirely in science today, but they make sense and they're logical. So the objectives for this part would be basically describe what's called the nature and the property of universal fluid. So what is that? What is universal fluid? What that means? And understand the basic function of the perispirit. Okay? So the majority of this talk will be based on two of the main codifying books of Spiritism. So for those who don't know, there are 5 books that were initially written by Allan Kardec that really codifies, you know, the doctrine, which is a bad name in English because it has some sort of a negative connotation, but read the teachings of Spiritism. So the first book of all is this one, the Spirit's book, which was published in 1857. From that point on, he wrote 4 more books over a period of 11 years. The second book was the Medium's book, the third was the Gospel, the fourth was Heaven and Hell, and the fifth and last one is the other one in which the talk is based, the Genesis, which is really sort of explaining the making of our planet and things, and talks a lot about all these things that we're going to be talking today. So, one major important concept to understand. When Kardec started his studies and trying to understand really what the universe is, what it's composed, and what it's made of, this is one of the things that were sort of basic principles that he needed to understand. What's called the universal trinity. So they're basically in the world, in the universe, anywhere we can think, the 3 main elements that form this. First and foremost is God. Second is the Spirit. Third is the matter. And in between them, there is the universal cosmic fluid. So we're going to go and explain each single one of them so we know exactly what they mean. So, God. So that is the absolute first question. And for those who don't know, the Spirit's book is based on questions and answers. There are 1,032 questions, if I'm not mistaken. And divided in different chapters, and there are like question, answer, and then sometimes comments by Allan Kardec to try to dive deeper into that teaching. So his very first question in the book is, what is God? God has many different meanings for many different religions. We've talked about God through the entire, you know, since humanity existed. So the answer was pretty simple, actually. God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. So what does that mean? So first of all, he says that God is what created everything. So he's the first cause. So nothing happened without God's desire or will and actually making. And he is the supreme intelligence, meaning he is the most intelligent being that exists. Or he's not even a being, because we don't know what God really is. But he is the supreme intelligence and the first cause that created everything. With that comes some important aspects of what God really is. So Spiritism, not necessarily different from many religions, but there are 6 attributes to God that makes him what he is. Or she, it, we don't know. So first of all, God is eternal. Always existed, always will exist, and we'll never understand what that means, but that's what it is, because we can't understand eternity, right? Our concept, our mind, infinite eternity, we don't know what that means. I mean, our mind cannot really understand what that is. God is unchangeable, meaning He's always existed and He's always perfect. He doesn't change. If He changes, His laws change, the universe changes, then everything is relative. So different than human laws, which vary and progress with our own advancement, God's laws are unchangeable. That's how they always were, how they are going to be. He's immaterial, He doesn't have a body, and we don't know what He is, what she is, what He looks like or anything. He's unique. There's only one. There's no more than one God. If there's more than one God, then the different set of rules, then nothing applies. So the universe is unstable. The God is all-powerful. There's nothing more powerful than Him, and He's essentially just and good. Okay? So He's always good. He's just. He's never going to do anything that is not in our good interest. He's all-powerful, unique, and immaterial. And unchangeable and eternal. Now the second element of that Trinity, which is what is the Spirit. So the Spirit, as everything else, was created by God. And the Spirit was described by the spirits themselves as what they call the intelligent principle of the universe. Different than God, they're not God. I'm talking about a different kind of intelligence, because God is the ultimate supreme intelligence, right? So God created the Spirit as being intelligent, the ability to develop their intelligence through time. Question 25, is the Spirit independent of matter? So meaning trying to understand what is the difference between the Spirit and the matter, or is it only one of the properties of the matter? So is Spirit related to matter in any way? So he gives the example as color is a property of light and as sound is a property of air. Well, the Spirits again say, kind of a silly question, but no. Spirit and matter are distinct. They're two different things, two separate. So that's why part of the Trinity. But the union of spirit and matter is necessary to give intelligent activity to matter. So matter in of itself has nothing, has no intelligence, has nothing. It needs to be worked on and given activity and force and life by the intelligent principle, which is the Spirit. Okay? And what definition can I give to matter then? So matter is the element which enchains the Spirit. That's a very interesting word that they put, enchains the Spirit. It's all like it holds the Spirit back in a way. The instrument which serves it and upon which at the same time it exerts its action. So matter is what the Spirit uses throughout its existence to be able to progress, to work. And at the same time, it is an enchainment in a sense that it drags him down and makes it hard. So to have matter is, in theory, a little harder than if you didn't. And we're going to see what that means as we talk about the progression, the moral progression of the spirits, and how they relate to matter in a different way as well. So now coming back, so God being the creator, matter being the material principle of which we, the spirits, and the intelligent principle, utilize to grow and progress. And then there's this big thing, what the heck is the universal cosmic fluid? So what is this? So everybody, there are many different aspects to explain it. Everybody says we're all immersed in this thing. It's like a big pool. We're sitting in this pool. And all sorts of analogies to try to understand. But really, it's really a difficult concept for us to understand. But the universal cosmic fluid, essentially what it is the elementary primitive matter, which modifications and transformations constitute the innumerable varieties of the bodies of nature. So basically what Kardec is saying here is that the universal cosmic fluid is the absolute unity, the essence of any molecule or whatever we can think. So the smallest part possible that will form matter. It's something we don't know in science, that we don't understand. So whatever we know, it's much more primitive than that. Okay? And variable combinations of that will create everything that we know and all the things that we don't know that we're going to talk about. So is what forms all material elements of the universe. And when I say all material elements, you know, we're not only talking about chair, table, it's everything. The world, the stars, its planets, you know, the space between the planets. There's something everywhere. Nothing is empty. There's no emptiness. That emptiness is filled by the universal cosmic fluid in its multiple forms. Okay? So the concept of an elemental principle of matter is not new. I mean, dates back to, you know, to Greece, you know, in the 460 BC, Democritus was the philosopher that came up with the idea of the atom, which is essentially a very similar principle, that there is something that is very small, and the way he came up with that was really just a piece of paper that he kept on cutting and said, well, there will be a point that I can't cut this anymore, and that will be the smallest fraction of whatever matter we know. So atom, which means indivisible. But as we know, we've progressed, and then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it took 2,500 years to find that out, but that's okay. Started understanding more of the composition of the atom itself, and this is kind of what most of us probably study in school, right? The atom is composed of a nucleus and electrons that rotate around, and then over time we found that actually, well, the nucleus is more than one particle. You know, it's got positrons, it's got neutrons. Oh, and actually they're actually made of something else. Neutrines and this and that. And all of a sudden, recently, in the past 10 years, finally, science talked about the Higgs boson, which was called the God particle. So, at least for science, what we think is the smallest possible part of matter that exists. And I just bring this, and you're going to say, what the heck, why is he showing this? But this is Dr. Peter Higgs, the guy who explained, who described the Higgs boson, and I'm going to put for you to understand what his explanation of that is.
Well, like all elementary particles, I think we field theorists think of it like Einstein thought of photons as just these particles are just packages of energy of some kind of field. And the feature which distinguishes this kind of theory, which leads to this kind of symmetry breaking, is the existence of what we theoretical physicists call the vacuum, which means nowadays something different from what it used to mean. It means just the lowest energy state that you can possibly have, in which there are no particles around, but there may be something around, and that something around can be a background field of some sort, which pervades the universe. So in this theory, there is such a background field, and the background field, in interaction with all the other stuff which goes through it, is responsible for generating the masses and mass differences of the other particles, elementary particles, the ones which are packages of energy of all the other fields, simply because the background affects the way the waves propagate. But then the field itself can be excited or classically to give you waves, and the packages of energy of that are the Higgs boson. So it's an extra which comes with this type of theory, that you need to have something there which is the excitation of the background field.
I'm going to stop there. The reason why I brought this is because, you know, I wanted to know what this is. So this is like the brilliant explanation of Dr. Peter Higgs, the guy who explained this. And I listened to this like 20 times. I have no idea what he just said. I have no idea. And this guy is a human being. A human being, yes, the physicists are very well, and we cannot comprehend what he's trying to explain. And the reason why I put this in is just to say, if there's something that we might not be able to understand, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that we're not there. We don't have the level of knowledge to really understand. So that was the point of this video. Is like, I have no idea what this is, but it's the God particle. So let's keep our minds open. You know, even in science, we don't understand what we're talking about. So yeah. So labeling. Well, anyway. So the fluidic elements of the universe. So this is where kind of it all begins. In an etherealized state, the cosmic fluid is not uniform. Without ceasing to be ethereal, it is submitted to modifications. These modifications constitute distinct fluids. So here is really the starting of the explanation of what the universal fluids mean. What is that? So these are all changes of the universal cosmic fluid, that very primitive element matter that exists. And it combines in many, many different ways that we don't really know how many. They're probably innumerable, uncountable. And they form different types of fluids. Fluids in the sense that they are, they're not necessarily, they're not measurable by our standards. So there are many different sort of levels of density of matter, right? So to the point, the things that we can actually see and palpate, which is very dense matter, to many different levels within the etherealized, as he calls, so the ones that we can't see type of matter, okay? So all these fluids of different kinds, they are what forms the universe and everything that there is in it in association with the spiritual principles. So the concept is very simple. If you just come to basic chemistry, it's this, you have basic elements that can be combined in a multitude of ways to form different things. So this is not a crazy concept. This is science as we know, can explain this very simply, as we can see in the H2 and O2 form water, H2O. Simple chemistry, organic chemistry. All being relative, these fluids have for the spirits an appearance as material as that of objects of incarnates. So, we think of matter as things we can touch, things we can see, things we can feel, because we are limited by where we are in the spiritual and the incarnated body, limited by the senses that are provided to us and that are fed into our brain. So we can only hear those things that our ear is able to hear. We know there are many different kinds of sounds that our human ear can, right? The dog can hear something that we can't. The dog can smell things we can't. And even a blind person can touch and feel things that we can't feel. So that is all relative. So just because we can hear, we can taste it, can see it, can smell it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we have to understand that that's a true concept, because that's where a lot of the materialistic mentality comes from, is that if I can see it, if I can prove it, then it doesn't exist. No, that's not true. One day, hopefully we'll get there. So there are things that we're not able to sense, but the spirit has a completely different sense. It's not limited by our tactile feedback, by our hearing, by our smell. It is able to perceive things in a different way. And that's why he says, all things being relative, meaning the ability of each spirit also to perceive different sort of densities of matter, and that will be relative to that, to how evolved that spirit is. That he's able to see these fluids that we're talking about as true objects. I mean, they have form, they have color, and you're going to see he explains that a little better later. So these fluids, to us, they're invisible, but to the spirit, they're not. Okay? So then comes another very important concept of what humans, what the incarnated people, what we are. So there are three parts to the human that we know. One is the body, is this, what we feel, what we can see, what brought us here. So when we were born in the womb, that's where we're growing, our material being. Then there's the soul, which is the incarnated spirit. So in Spiritism, we use the word spirit or free spirit for the one that is not incarnated, not in a material body, and in the material body we use the word soul. But they can be used interchangeably as long as you understand the concept. And the third is the intermediary, so something that is in between the spirit and the body, okay, which is the perispirit. Okay, so that's the classic concept that probably most people here know, of the three layers of the body. And this one is from my daughter, that she drew this in one of the Sunday youth education classes. So basically, the concept is that the spirit is the most ethereal part of our being, which we don't really understand what it is, but it's the intelligent principle. Then in the outer shell, here, there's the body. And then in between the two, there's an intermediary. And that intermediary is the perispirit. Also, that is not a crazy concept. This is like basic, botanic. It's just like a fruit. Our spirit is the seed, the perispirit is actually wheat or whatever, and then the body being the peel. So the concept of layers, exists in all over nature. So again, this is just a depiction of that. So the fluidic body, that's another name for the perispirit, and that's probably a more appropriate name, meaning that the perispirit is made of fluids, what we were talking about before. So fluids of different densities, they're in the universe, and what they're one of the most important products of the cosmic fluid. Because again, like we said, matter, or the formation of matter by the universal fluid is what allows us to work, to progress, and to live. So it's what we use to progress. So that's a condensation of cosmic fluid around a focus of intelligence or the soul, like we said. So it is a semi-material substance, nothing that our eyes can see, which constitute the innermost envelope of the spirit and unites the soul and the body. So the concept is also, making it very rudimentary, is the immediate link between the spirit and the body itself. So if the spirit thinks, for that thought to reach the brain, for me, for example, I want to touch this. The thought began in the spirit, transmitted through the perispirit into the brain, that then makes me move matter and touch that. So it's the intermediary. And we think simplistically, that it can be just one layer, but as we know, as we're going to see too, there are multiple different layers and stratas of that. So it's a very complex, if we can call, organ of the spirit per se, in which he uses as that interface. And the perispirit, or the fluidic body, supposedly, from what they describe, is connected molecule by molecule. At what level of molecule it is that, universal cosmic fluid level? We don't know. They don't really understand. But every single cell is attached to our spirit, to our perispirit. Every single atom of our bodies is attached to the perispirit. So everything is in intimate relationship between the three. So the spirits draw their perispirits from the place where they are, meaning that within a certain place and space and time, that's where the composition of a perispirit comes. So we'll vary a little bit. That is to say that the envelope is made from the ambient fluid. So whatever you are, that's what it's going to be made of. Okay? The result is that the constitutive elements of the perispirit must vary according to worlds. What that means too. So I think the concept of according to worlds, I wanted to make that more clear so that there's no question. So there are 5 basic tenets of beliefs of the Spiritism that sort of differentiates a little bit from the other quote-unquote religions, because Spiritism is not just a religion, right? Spiritism is a combination of science, religion, and philosophy. Science because it tries to explain the mechanistic way of how things work. Religion because it believes in God and doing good and love and progress. And philosophy because it's our inner nature. Where we are, why are we here? What is the goal? What is the purpose? So that's the philosophical part. So the 5 basic tenets, which is right here, right? Existence of God, we all agree with that. The soul is immortal. We're not eternal, but we're immortal, meaning we're created at one point, but once we're created, we're going to live forever, right? We don't die. The plurality of existence, so reincarnation, meaning that we exist, once we're created, we exist forever, and we come many different times in order to grow, to progress, to evolve. That we can communicate with spirits, that they can talk to us, and that every single space on the universe is inhabited by something. So that's what it means by the different worlds in which the spirit is in. Venus, there's no one. Because billions probably of spirits in there. Even the space between, and the moon. I mean, we're very egocentric in thinking that this, and whoever watched the lecture by Alvaro 2 months ago, I mean, the magnitude of the size of the universe is to think we're the only ones. I mean, come on. So it makes no sense, right? It's irrational to think that all this and there's nothing else there. So every single space is inhabited, just in the ways that we, in our senses, we can't see it or perceive it. And that's what it is, you know. When he gave the talk, it's like brilliant. And when he shows pictures like this, and then he starts to blow them up and blow them up and blow them up. So little points that you see like that, I mean, that's a galaxy with billions of stars and quadrillion planets, and it's just astounding how small we are. Or we're just part of a much bigger thing, which is actually reassuring and not necessarily bad. Better go back. Oh. So the nature of that fluidic envelope is also dependent on the moral evolvement of that spirit. So as we progress, as we become morally evolved, we also react, quote unquote, or we're involved by a different degree of matter. So it's more subtle. A spirit like Jesus, for example, of course, he's what we call the governor of earth and really our guide and model. But he is such an evolved spirit that if we had to compare, you know, he's spirit to us, because he also has a perispirit. And as a spirit, we're always going to have one, but they will be different as we progress. They'll be more thinner, if we could use that expression. So as we evolved, we'll have less and less of that dense matter. And what that does is that it opens up the spirit to different sensations, his intelligence, his ability to perceive, his ability to move, his ability to feel. So, and that's one thing that we get from different books explaining that once we, quote unquote, die, how a different world opens up to us, because perceptions and things and feelings that we're sort of being held behind by our physical body. The spiritual fluids are then the atmosphere of the spiritual beings, where special phenomena take place, perceptible to the sight and hearing of the spirit. So again, the same thing. They create sort of the atmosphere. So it's the psychosphere of the spirit is translated into that fluidic body, into the perispirit. And I know this is getting very technical, but soon enough it'll be interesting, I promise you. So, how does the spirit manipulate matter? I mean, going to a bigger picture, how the Jesus and alike create planets and all those things. It's the same principle, of course, in a much greater scheme. But for us, in a smaller scheme, how do we manipulate? So, how do we create? How do we interact with the fluid that constitutes ourselves and constitutes the ambience where we are? So on Earth is easy, right? We go, we chop the tree, we get the wood, we make a table. In the spiritual world, it's different in a sense. We do the same thing, but not in the same mechanism. So we do it all by thought, all by thinking. So the willpower and the thinking power of the spirit is what affects the matter and the universal cosmic fluid to change it in whatever it wants to be. So that's why it says, they acts upon the spirit, not by manipulating them as man, but by the aid of thought and will. So our thought can change and create things that are actually visible to the spirit, not to us. So they have form. And this is the concept that we bring, that thought is the most, I have the slides in a different phrase, but that's okay. So that the thought is the most powerful thing that the spirit has. It's what it's able to do. Everything that we do is through the power of the thought. And the thought originates in the mind, which originates in the spirit. And this is something that science is starting to catch on. Many neuroscientists have already understood the concept that the thought, so the mind itself, is not in the brain. The brain is matter, the mind is not matter. The mind is beyond matter. And this is just one of the many books that exist these days talking about sort of this spiritual brain, which is really talking about the mind, how the mind is not attached to the body. And Dr. Mario Beauregard, he's a neurobiologist at the University of Montreal. So the thought, as I said before, will impress these fluids and may give them a specific appearance, form, and color. So we'll actually create objects. And these changes can be conscious or unconscious. So we can do those things. Of course, the more evolved we are, we know how to do it. So the more skilled a worker you are, you can carve and make a nice table versus, need to be just a piece of plank and 2 wood sticks. And this can be done consciously and unconsciously. And that's important, the mechanism of how diseases happen and how we can harm ourselves as it goes. So the concept of thought forms, that thoughts have forms. So they're actually visible things. This is not a new Spiritist concept. This has been described in Buddhism for thousands of years, the concept of thought forms, that what we think actually creates a form in a different plane, in a transdimensional. Exactly what you're talking about. I mean, there's no deceiving it. There's no, I really don't want to do that, but I'm smiling at you. There's no way, you can't deceive it, because if you're thinking, if you're considering it, it's form, it's got matter, that it's in there. And of the many examples that we can give are how spirits present themselves when they come, or either to a medium, or if they want to even materialize themselves. So more evolved spirits, they are able to manipulate how they actually appear to you. So one of the examples is Emmanuel. Emmanuel, for those who don't know, he's the spirit mentor of Chico Xavier. Chico Xavier being the most famous medium, wrote hundreds of books. And Emmanuel decided to appear, at least to us, as one of his reincarnations from way back then. In the book that he wrote, telling his own story, called 2,000 Years Ago, when he was a senator in Rome. His name was Publio, I always forget, Lentulus. And that's how he presents. So this is Publio Lentulus. So when he comes and he presents to Chico, and he shows himself, that's how he shows, because that was such an important incarnation for him that he thinks that was what flipped him into becoming what he is now, a much more evolved spirit. So because of that, he's had many more incarnations after that. When he presents himself with that. But he's able to mold his spirit to look like that, because he has that ability. So that is a conscious way that you can manipulate our own perispirit, but there are unconscious ways. And there are a few books that explain this. One in particular is a book called Liberation. So Liberation is one of Chico Xavier's books written by the spirit André Luiz. Okay, so André Luiz was a physician on Earth, and he died, and he wrote many different books, including also Solar, tells a story in the book and the movie we all saw. But he tells the story in this book about this woman who died, and she was in the lower zones, meaning, she was a troubled person, so she was sort of surrounded by her own mental problems. And she had killed 4 children, and they don't describe very well, but I think it was that she aborted them, and she also killed her husband. And she felt like she was an animal, because, as we know in nature, every now and then, wolves and bears and whatnot, they will eat their children, for whatever reason, for their cubs, and she felt like she was a wolf because she killed her children. And André Luiz describes how she unconsciously, because she had that mental idea that she was a wolf, she started to actually change her perispirit and became in the shape of a wolf. Unconsciously, she wasn't doing it purposefully, but she was able to modify her own perispirit due to guilt and change that. So our thoughts, if they're negative, they can influence us in a negative way. And that's one of the examples of unconscious matter manipulation.
Yeah. I don't know if it's important to say that, but when she was doing that, the other spirits that were holding her captive, they were influencing her with their thoughts.
Correct.
So that's something that happens a lot in the world, like when other people try to influence us in some way. So she was very vulnerable. So she had something inside of her that allowed that to happen. She accepted the idea. So it was easy for them to do that, and she helped.
That's great. So that's kind of sort of the mechanism of how she did it, but it wasn't somebody that did it to her. She did it to herself because of her vulnerable situation. So she accepted what they said. And there was a complicated story. I didn't want to go through the details, how she was being judged, and then it creates a whole lot of questions and whatnot that are difficult to explain. So, but yes, you are correct. So our state of mind is what led into that specific scenario that she sort of became a wolf kind of thing. So the thought of the incarnated mind acts upon the spiritual fluids as that of discarnate. So basically, incarnated mind, so us, what we think also affects our perispirit and the fluids around us, just like the spirits, because at the end, we are spirits as well. It is transmitted from spirit to spirit in the same way, and according as it is good or bad, it holds a vicious or a healthy relation to the surrounding fluid. So basically what he's saying is, our thoughts will act upon our perispirit, and if they're good, they will have good consequences. If they're bad, we'll have bad consequences. And our ability to perceive that environment is also very important, because who doesn't never had the experience where you might go to a certain place and you walk in and you go, there's something weird, I don't feel good here. That kind of, or you go in and the opposite, I feel very well here. So that has to do with the density of that fluid that is in that environment that your perispirit is able to perceive, that gives you the positive, the healthy relation, or a vicious or negative relation to that environment itself. So, we all can go into something like this. It's 2014 Earth Day here in Austin. Everybody getting around and hugging themselves and thinking about peace and love and Earth. Let's save the planet. So very uplifting, very happy environment. And we can all feel that you're going to go in there. It would be very unlikely that you're going to feel bad in that place. But then you look at something like this, not judging, but this is a rave party, So you can even, if you start looking at the individual, faces of the people there, you see how it's kind of it's a dense sort of environment, right? And so if you go to a place like this, you're going to be bathed by that fluid, by that environment that has in that place. So, and that's a fact. It's not, again, not saying that we're better than anybody there, but it's a fact. So how we behave and what we do and what we attend, or the friends we have and the things, are all options that we make that can be harmful or not to ourselves.
So you're saying, is it, if you use the pool metaphor, then is it like water that gets dirtied by or changed by all the spirits, incarnated or disincarnated,
correct,
that are there? They influence the fluid that's around them?
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So all over, the density of the fluid and the keratin, the vibration of the energy, because matter, nothing more than energy in different states of vibration, that is going to be the entire environment. So you're going to you're going to jump into a murky pool, or or sort of a lava, or whatever whatever you want to call it, but it will be denser because everybody in that area have the same sort of affinity. They're all there with the same intent. It can be good, can be negative, so and that will vary the entire ambiance of the fluids that surrounds the spirit.
Just to make a point there, this is just for us, because for evolved spirits, they can go where they're not going to be.
We're going to come to that.
Okay.
So again, it's all relative, right? It's always said in the beginning. So, and that the concept of that we can actually absorb those fluids, and those fluids can change our perispirit. So the concept of spiritual absorption of fluid. So where we go, we can actually be actively harming ourselves. That's a little scary. But the midst of where bad spirits abound are then impregnated with bad fluids, which are absorbed by our perispiritual pores. So we're porous. So we can change the molecules of our perispirit by being in negative places. Of course, that would depend a lot on your degree of involvement, your degree of how much are you able to be changed psychologically by the environment where you are. Good example, a guy who used to be an alcoholic, right? He finally got a hold of himself and he stopped drinking. He goes to a party, everybody's drinking. He's going to have the urge, and he might fail. He might give in to that urge because he's still not to the point that he's over that. So he's being influenced by the environment to drag himself down again to where he still is. He's still getting better. Same thing for the smoker. Same thing for any vice of any kind, of anything. The guy who cheats on his wife and decides not to, and then he goes out, he drinks, and then he's got all these girlfriends, he's going to cheat on his wife again, even though he said he's never going to do it again. It's the same principle, that you're affected by the environment where you are. And when we let our guard down, that's when we're influenced, and that's when we're going to fail. So being always aware of what we're trying to do. So if you know something is going to make you do something you don't want to do, then you got to change that. And that's the problem with getting rid of vices, right? It's because vices are habits, and their lives rotate around that, how they live their life. So they have to change their way of life to get over that vice. So,
That's the point.
very difficult.
That's the point.
Inner transformation.
Referring to when I talked about the wolf,
Mhm.
and you accept it, so you can be influenced by what is happening.
Correct. But that level of acceptance, I mean, she is so deranged at that point. There's no way that she could not accept it. So there's so many levels for you to be able to withstand something like this, right? That it's very complicated.
It's what you said about the vices, the change we need to do in ourselves. So the attitudes we have, like she chose to do what she did, like she could have not done that. Do you understand?
True.
But sometimes you don't have this training, so that's why we practice it every day.
Right, and that's why we incarnate again. So she probably came, or all of us, right? We came with goals that we have to achieve. But once we're here, we don't have the conscience of that. We have to act upon our instincts and what we truly believe and understand and how we feel. And because I don't have the conscience, I might fall again. And that's why we come and keep coming over and over. So until that is learned.
And that's why she said that the spirits that are evolved, they can go to places like that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
They not only
because-
can, they have to change themselves to be able to go into those places. So that's, again, many books of André Luiz, as we've all read, it shows how they have to make themselves denser to be able to go to these places. And André Luiz not being as evolved as the other ones because he's learning, he's saying the bad feelings that he got from that place, right? He's like, it's not pleasant. And then he would get distressed from time to time. He would get, mentally irritated or mad or something. And the mentor would look at him, compose yourself, right? So it's all moral evolvement. If you're able to not be affected by things, it's a matter of how evolved you are, correct? So the more evolved you are, you're just not affected. It's okay. And that's something we don't really understand.
It
Right?
could be that.
That's how how Jesus being crucified, and he's praying to God, please, right? Have mercy on them. They have no idea what they're doing. It's just, we can't, how can you do that?
It could be that when we have moral strength and we know we are peaceful inside of us, we have the will to do that peacefully. We know what we want to do.
Correct. That's the
We
beginning.
know what we don't want to do.
Correct. But it's training, right? It's something that takes many trials. So that's what that kind of picture shows, If we're surrounded by good fluids, we're all happy and we're vibrating and it's good for us, and if we're bad, then we're not that happy. Since the fluids of an ambient are modified with the projection of the spiritual thought, his spiritual body, which is a constituent part of him, and which receives directly and in a permanent way the impressions of the thought, should receive even more of the impressions of his good or bad qualities. So again, go into the concept that not only where he is and he's able to absorb that fluid, but us, what we're thinking, will influence our perispirit and how it is. We can destabilize or stabilize our perispirit by our thoughts. These fluids act upon the perispirit and react upon the material body. Again, everything that happens at the spirit level psychologically gets transmitted to the spirit and transmitted to the body. If the effluvia of that thought process is good, the body receives a salutary impression. If bad, a painful one. If the bad are permanent, energetic, they can cause physical disorders. That's how diseases occur. So this occurs by a multitude of reasons specifically. Things that we can be living through now, or things that we're carrying on. But everything that we are, that we feel, all our guilt, all our concerns, all our prejudices, all our, negatives and positive things, they're impressed into the perispirit. And that's going to translate into the physical body. So the diseases that you might have, hypertension, diabetes, or whatever, all those things are a dysfunction of the spirit that is shown in the perispirit and that is transmitted into the body. And that's where science has difficulty in trying to understand. You might have the gene for diabetes, but you don't develop diabetes. Why is that? So why does that gene get activated in you? So, for science these days, it's like the genome is the answer to everything. It's the cause of it all. But it's really not. It's really probably just a consequence of everything that we're talking about. So you might have it there, but if you change your mindset, if you change the way you think, if you were able to overcome that tendency that you have won't show up because you're actually able to overcome that specific problem. And what exactly those are that cause each individual diseases, nobody knows, and I think over time we'll know more. But that's basically it. That the changes in our perispirit is what causes diseases in the body. And that translation can be very slow or very fast. And that would explain certain chronic diseases versus some more acute, sort of fulminant type diseases. Now everything's fine, and then all of a sudden, you have leukemia and you die within a week, something like that. Versus you have that chronic, indolent little disease or whatever. Those are all, again, there's so many different variations on how they are transmitted into the body that we don't understand, but those are important. So Emmanuel also in his book, The Consoler, he says exactly the same thing. The maladies of the soul, when he fails to ascend through the human envelope, the sick body reflects the interior prospect of the ill spirit. The pathogenesis is the aggregate of inferiorities of the psychic apparatus. Physical diseases are diseases of the psychic apparatus of the spirit. It's our mental, it's psychological, it's psychosomatics, you could say that. Psychic leading into soma body, psychic the mind. So every problem that we have in our body, a flu, why do you get the flu and you don't get the flu? At that point, whatever is happening in your perispirit, it made you susceptible to that, but you didn't. We don't know. Every single thing that happens to us is in our perispirit and in the mind. So what are the thoughts that we have to prevent, to try to minimize? The problems in our perispirit. How can we be protective of ourselves? How can we have the will? So some of them that we should try to avoid. Jealousy, common things. And that's kind of a cute picture there. But jealousy is considered a psychological infancy. I mean, the person who is jealous, they have no self-confidence. And as such, he's unable to love because he fears to lose control. So in order for the jealous person to develop self-confidence, he needs to have power over something. And the jealous person is that he has to own a person or something. And the fear of losing that is what causes jealousy. So one of the things that we can work on, so it's about self-confidence, about knowing ourselves. Laziness, not really talked a lot, but it's actually a very important problem in humankind. And the reason why you don't hear a lot about it is because it causes no immediate effect to people around. They're really just hurting themselves. So the lazy person is the idleness, as we call it, the person who has no motivation to do anything, has no energy. With that, he starts to lose his own self-esteem. He thinks he's worthless. And as he's worthless, that leads into depression and physical diseases and things like that. And then he starts to blame his surrounding. I mean, you're not interested in me. Why you're not helping me? And then so it's always a sort of a victim type thing, and it's a very, very difficult state of mind to get yourself from. There's anger. Okay, so all these are bad things that change your perispirit. So anger is sort of a reflex, right? It's in nature, it's an instinct that we all have to sort of protect ourselves. So the instinct of preservation. But when it's uncontrolled, it leads to these situations where it leads into violence. And that is also lack of self-confidence. The person who's not confident in themselves, in order to, they feel sort of threatened by a situation, they'll have rage and anger as a way of trying to artificially, put himself superior to that person which he's relating to. So it's inability to control their own emotions. Resentment, probably one of the worst ones. That's a classic saying, like drinking the poison, expecting the other person to hurt. The process of resentment is really relates to pride. So our ego, our pride, which is the essence of 90% or plus of all our problems, is because of our pride and our ego. It's that need and the constant struggle for power. And when you're frustrated for whatever reason, it didn't happen the way you want, you resent. And that can lead into a much worse feeling, which is sort of the ultimate side of resentment, which is hate. Right? Hate blinds the person. It takes away completely their sanity, their rationality. And that's what we are. We're supposedly rational animals. And we have free will and have rationality to control our emotions or instincts. And when we lose that through instability of our senses and our feelings of our psychology, that's when we become more like animals and we hurt ourselves. Guilt also, it's a very common. Everything almost that we do wrong leads into guilt. Guilt being when we start to awaken to the true meaning of life, we look back at the things that we've done and we regret those. And we regret those in a way that leads into the feeling of that we've missed the opportunity, or that we have no way to take that back. And I regret that. And that guilt draws you down. And that again, it's the beginning of the awakening, but it's important to try to control that, because that can cause depression and many different physical diseases. And when you read the list, this is based on a book by John John. It puts a list of different diseases that are caused by each individual feeling, negative ones. And fear is also similar to guilt, relates to once you've discovered you've done something wrong and you feel guilt about it, then you have the fear of maybe other people finding out. That's what develop fears. And those are the fears that are irrational, illogical, that we're born with, that come in our background, in our baggage, but they're fears that can be actually learned in childhood. And she puts that very specifically on how important are for us to try when we're raising a child or kids and whatnot. The children are very influenceable in terms of specifically of that feeling, the development of fear. So how we can be good sort of coaches to those children versus not. So basically that's the concept of everything we talked about in a nutshell. So anytime we do things that are not supposed, that goes against the laws of God, that goes against love, or what they call the lack of love, the absence of love. So that's the ultimate essence of the message of Jesus, right? Love. Love one another, love God above all. Love yourself and love your neighbor. Whenever we don't do that, we create resentment in the spirit that causes an imbalance of the mind. The imbalance of the mind causes an energetic imbalance in the perispirit and causes disease of the body. And this is, again, confirmed by Emmanuel, also in the same book, The Consoler. For the man on earth, health can mean the perfect balance of material organs. For the spiritual realm, however, health is the perfect harmony of the soul, in which to obtain it, many times there is need for the precious transitory maladies and deficiencies of earth. So diseases as being ways of us learning, of us, quote unquote, suffering through that problem, so that we can evolve, so we can become better. So, and this is reassuring in the sense that we always tend to feel sorry for people, and not that we shouldn't feel sorry, because somebody is in suffering and is in need. It's okay to have mercy and try to help. But understand that that process that they're going through is important for them. And at the end, it's going to make them better, hopefully, if we learn the lesson. So that might help us at least cope with family problems and family health issues and our own health issues, and how do we say that. So the references are there, as I said. And we'll finish with a message from Joana de Angelis, which is, Joana was, she is the spiritual mentor of Divaldo Franco. Divaldo Franco is probably, in terms of incarnated mediums, probably the most famous incarnated medium from Brazil. Sort of in the same magnitude probably as Chico, but different perspective on how, you know, they spread the word. Chico being much more of a writer than anything else, and Divaldo does a lot of lectures. He travels the world. Until now, he's what, 80?
He's 90 years
Thank you.
old. Last week he was in a station in Italy carrying his own bag, and he had a full agenda for this month. Next week he's going to be in New York if anybody is ready.
Incessant worker. So Joana de Angelis, which is his spiritual mentor, she writes a lot of books about psychology and things like that, psychiatric issues. And this is one of the messages from the book Happy Life, which is irrigate your system with healthy thoughts. The action of the mind on emotion, the body, the entire physiological apparatus is incontestable. A large number of illnesses are due to mental laziness, discouragement, rebelliousness, and self-destructive ideas. Channel your thinking to pleasant, healthy, optimistic matters, and you will live under their reflection, enjoying the well-being that is radiated to others and that produces peace. With that, I think we're done for part one.